I think there's nothing that compares to being a founder. I'm not just on one brand. I'm leading Larissa's Kitchen, Wild River, Country Fresh, and Golden Island. And these are four really strong and emerging jerky companies and meat snack companies. The upfront cost and just the ongoing cost to run a CPG company is really, really high. And so what I found is that a lot of these founders go into it undercapitalized and just kind of struggle along throughout the entire way. And eventually it's a pretty tough spot to be in. My goal wasn't to shut down in 5 years. So if I had a goal that was to have a healthy business for the next 10, 20, 30 years, and I shut down in 5, to me, that's a failure. But I'm okay. It was a failure, but not a waste. I learned a ton. It was worth every minute that I spent on it.
So today we have a very, very special guest, Kyle Peters, aka the superstar of the CPG world. Kyle is a very interesting person for me. He's pretty unique in the sense that he has worked in a massive Fortune 10 company. At the same time, he has started his own brand, and currently he's managing multiple multi-million-dollar brands. So I think he has experienced the gamut of beginning something from scratch, working for a large company, and everything in between. So I think that makes Kyle's experience and perspective very unique, and that's what I found personally very interesting. Thank you so much for taking the time.
I appreciate it, Keel. That's probably the nicest intro I've ever got in my life. So thank you.
No, of course, that it's true, and like I said, I'm very glad. So this is the first question I'm sure a lot of people have in mind is that you have experienced everything in all these different stages of your professional life in the CPG world. Which one has been the most exciting for you?
Most exciting. I mean, I think honestly, right now, what I'm doing is probably the most exciting. I think there's nothing that compares to being a founder, right? So it's almost unfair to try and talk about doing anything, being as exciting as being a founder. That's the best. But for me right now, I am super energized and really enjoy the work that I'm doing at Jack Links, which I even told the team at Jack Links that like I didn't necessarily believe I was ever gonna find like a company that I would work for and feel as like at home as I do right now, which 100% sounds like I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, right? And I get that, but it's true. This just feels like such a perfect fit for me from role and company wise, culture wise, just everything like that. It's great. So, and I would say the added excitement is because I'm not just on one brand, right? I'm leading Larissa's Kitchen, Wild River, Country Fresh, and Golden Island. And these are four really strong and emerging jerky companies and meat snack companies that are in various stages of their life, right? And so for me, it's super exciting to be able to kind of push and pull different levers to make each of them grow in their own unique way because they're at different stages of their life. So they require slightly different approaches to each. So for me, that's super exciting. I have a ton of fun doing it, and it's a crazy time for me to have joined being at the end of the year. But I love it. But again, nothing compares to being a founder, right? It's super unique and special.
Speaking of, and to all our viewers, I think Kyle has spent a lot of time in meeting with and speaking to founders who have had exits in their own personal space. So I'm curious to know about, you must have spoken to so many founders who have had to exit or who, followed that. What is the one thing that you found similar in all the threads of all the founders that you've spoken to who have had to exit?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, which probably isn't a surprise to most people, is just like money, right? Like it's money impacting you in one way or another. So that's lack of funds to just support the potential of growth, because CPG is an expensive industry as a whole, right? Oftentimes you have to, you're co-packing and you need a ton of money up front to actually produce a product. That product could be flawed in one way or another. So then if you need to kind of pivot and change the product, now you need to pay for another production run. And there's, of course, packaging. And if you are constantly redeveloping and redesigning the packaging, there's a constant reinvestment to then buy new packaging. And God forbid, you need specialized like size and special fit packaging for your co-packer, you're confined to only working with maybe one or two different suppliers for that packaging. So the upfront cost and just the ongoing cost to run a CPG company is really, really high. And so what I found is that a lot of these founders go into it undercapitalized and just kind of struggle along throughout the entire way. And eventually it's like, I'm not able to raise funding, or now the business is so unhealthy because of all the debt that's been taken out and everything else. It's like, you're kind of at a spot where, there's only so much that you can do, right? If the way that you're looking at things like fundraising is your only way out, it's a pretty tough spot to be in. And that's typically not when investors want to be writing checks. They always say the best time to raise money is when you don't need it. And that's super true. So I think for founders, when they're undercapitalized from the beginning, that's a big, it's a really big challenge. And I think, lack of focus ultimately is a massive dagger to any company. So those are two different things that I've seen. It's the financial impact in one way or another, or it is just lack of focus where founders are trying to kind of do too much and then it all catches up.
So would it be fair to say that no matter how good a product is, unless you have the financial backing to take that product up to a certain level, it would be kind of improbable that the product or the founder succeeds?
I would say yes, but with kind of like a caveat of, if the product is that good, right? You'll probably have POs one way or another coming from different retailers, and if you have POs from retailers, you can typically raise against it, or you can go and get PO financing, which is a really great creative way to optimize cash flow. So there are creative ways if you have that demand. I think a big thing with founders is there's a lack of demand, and there's not really a true understanding of why by the founder. And sometimes it's because the product is not needed or just isn't good. And it's tough because it's so emotional for founders to look objectively and say, well, damn, maybe this thing that I love so much isn't loved by a big enough market to actually build a healthy business around. And that's a really tough conversation for you to have with yourself, right? And I had to have a conversation with myself at the end of, for me, the margins just didn't make sense, right? Maybe you have demand and maybe you have a great product, but if your margins are pennies, you're just going to hemorrhage cash, and it's going to be really tough to build something that's going to stand the test of time. So that's the other thing too, is a lot of founders just don't have an understanding of margins.
And speaking about advice that you would give early stage CPG founders, from your own experience, when is the moment you realized that your venture would not be a viable solution?
What's going to be a failure? Yeah, no, I'm comfortable saying it. My goal wasn't to shut down in 5 years, right? So if I had a goal that was to have a healthy business for the next 10, 20, 30 years, and I shut down in 5, to me, that's a failure. But I'm okay. To me, that's not a dirty word. It's not failure. I always say, it was a failure, but not a waste, right? I learned a ton. It was worth every minute that I spent on it, because I'm not here in the position that I'm in right now at Jack Links, having the opportunity to lead these brands, if I didn't do what I did for 5 years. You know what I mean? So for me, failure, yes; waste, no. And I can pinpoint literally the exact moment that I realized it. It was the first time I took a week away from the business. I had a close friend of mine pass away, and so it was spending time with friends and family and everything else. And that time away, once I got back and it was towards the end of the year, I was reviewing projections and some POs and commitments we had for the following year. And we had a significant increase in cost of goods. After COVID, we had really seen, whey protein isolate increase triple digits. It was a 100%, increase in the costs. A couple of the other core ingredients that we had followed a similar trend. And so we just didn't have the margins, right? And I was raising funding at that time. I was bootstrapped from the beginning, but I was just going in to raise my first round and raise $1 million. And we started getting commitments, but as I was looking at projections and the margins and everything else, it was like, this isn't a situation that money solves, right? Like there's so many things as a founder that you experience that you have to sledgehammer your way through, right? Hard work, focus, and passion, those can be the solutions. But there's certain things throughout your journey as a founder that those attributes are not enough to conquer, right? And if the numbers don't make sense and the math isn't math, you're not going to be able to build a healthy business. And so for me, I had to look really objectively, pull the emotion out of the decision making and say, if I raise $1 million, does that solve the margin problem? Is this a good business in the next 2 years? And for me, I felt, looking at the landscape and projections and everything else, that it wasn't going to be that way. So I made a tough call and I decided to shut down. But it was, mid-October of 2021 that I shut down. It started in November. But yeah, it was, I can kind of whittle it down to just like a couple day span of when like it all just kind of started when I realized it. So.
And is there anything that helped you during, I'm sure that must be a mentally very taxing time.
Yeah, for
sure. To come out of it.
Yeah. So it's super emotional, right? Like, I mean, like the true moment of like recognizing it, like I was in tears, right? And that wasn't like the only, of course I cried other times too from it, because it was my identity for 5 years. My story of kind of like why I started the business and everything was very heavily tied to my mom and my mom's battle with cancer. And so just super, like, it felt like I was a failure to her, a failure to my family, to my friends, to my vendors and the retailers that I was selling into, the assisted living facilities, the retirement communities, all these places that the product was being sold at where people weren't really enjoying it. It's just that crazy sense of like failure, and people aren't going to think that I'm good enough, or that I have the abilities to be, a strong business person, all that type of stuff. Right. And honestly, I struggled for like a full year, like the grieving cycle. I ignored it a lot, right? Like the grief, because right after that, I started kind of trying to figure out what was going to be next, and was going through that process of being recruited and kind of trying to figure out what was next in my life. And I just kind of went from that to the next thing, right? And so my life just moved so quickly. I never really had time to like sit with myself, sit with the emotions, sit with like my thoughts and reflect. But I started doing that really slowly over the year, and sometimes not like intentionally. It was just kind of happening because I needed, like, my body needed to do that. And I just needed to take the time to reflect and talk things out. I talked a ton, like with my dad, with some friends and everything else. I think the response from just like the CPG community was incredibly helpful. Like, I'm very fortunate that people had saw my story in like the LinkedIn post that I made and reached out, and there was just so much more support than expected that it made it was just very helpful during that process. I don't think there was really anything that I did particularly well that helped me through it. I think time was the biggest thing for me, and the fact that I had the opportunity to step into a great role with Nestle, and not, struggle and have to, figure out how I was going to pay for bills or something like that. I was very fortunate in that sense. So I was able to kind of remove that concern out of my mind. But, I did an interview with a woman for the podcast that I've been working on about like founders that exit, close, or successfully sell their companies. And she had a really thoughtful, intentional approach after she shut down her company. And I promise this is more of a plug for her than it is for the podcast, because my podcast isn't even out yet. But, and I'm totally blanking on her name. I'm going to send it to you after if you want to like link it in the notes or something like that. But she was incredible. She had run her company for like 10 or 15 years. And when she left, she was really thoughtful in kind of like the way that she went about taking care of her mental health and the grieving process. So I think she's probably a better role model than me, because I just kind of ignored it for a little bit. And then over a year dealt with like, emotions hitting me in waves, and just talking things out with friends and family. But yeah, fortunate for the community. The advice I would give is to not shy away from it and be open to talking and sharing your story and sharing about your experience. And ultimately that'll be cathartic, and you'll find some.
Yeah, and I think I've said it before too. So mental health for founders is often not talked about. If somebody were to look at your LinkedIn profile now, it just seems like a natural progression, one after the other. But those in between, there are like vast, very debilitating phases of mental and or physical issues that you have had to deal with, which obviously is not at the forefront of anything, but it requires that kind of understanding to see that there are almost everyone goes through the same or if not different kinds of issues as well. So that's pretty good that you're opening up about it and you're letting a lot of people know that this is natural, and mental health is certainly a very important issue. Coming to your current role, which managing one brand is hard enough. So, you're managing, I believe, 4 to 5 massively successful brands right now. What do you think is one of the reasons why you and the team at Jack Links has done right so far to enable all these brands to succeed so far and continue to do so in the near future?
Yeah, I think, we have a really strong team, which again, it feels like I'm just like hitting like the talking points of anything, right? But we do have a very strong team that has, awesome experience in the industry from other really big brands and companies that have done marketing at the highest level. I'm not going to necessarily reference them, but if you can think of like brands that you would look at as like exemplary, brands in marketing, they've come from there. They just have so much experience. That's the foundation is good people, right? That understand business and understand how to manage brands. So that makes my job a little bit easier. Everybody's super on top of everything and has a very deep knowledge of the category. And so that's really helpful. I would say too, like the brands that I'm on, like they're not perfect in any sense, right? Like we're emerging brands. The category, my title has emerging brands in it because these brands aren't at Jack Links level yet, right? They have a pretty wide range, from, I don't necessarily want to say it, but just like it's a pretty wide range. And, so there's been a lot that's been done wrong and there's been a lot that's been done right. And what I think that Jack Links what Jack Links does really well is that one of our core values is be real. And it's actually, the company does live the values that it has set for itself. And be real to me comes to life in the biggest way from looking at something that doesn't work or isn't working and saying, this is underperforming. This isn't working well. Like, we need to call it out for what it is. We need to not try and pretty up the numbers and put lipstick on a pig for a presentation or some other nonsense. We need to call out these shortcomings and then say, how are we going to fix it? Right. And I think we do that better than a lot of companies. I think we can probably improve in that area as well. But I think that that's something that Jack Links as a whole really does, emulate that value of be real. So I think that gives us an upper hand where we're willing to kind of say like, okay, that didn't work. Now let's go find something that does, where I've seen other companies that don't necessarily take that same approach. So I think having a strong foundation of people, a strong culture, and the ability to kind of look at yourself and say like, yeah, that didn't work, but like, let's go find something that does. I think that puts us in a really good spot. And of course, for the emerging brands, we benefit greatly from being in the portfolio and family of brands with Jack Links, an extremely successful company that is the category leader in meat snacks, right? So we have that added benefit that many other emerging and challenger brands just don't have. So I think I would be, I can't ignore that aspect, right? Like that's something that should be talked about.
Got it. And I think we must be aware of the fact that a lot of aggregators are not doing so well, in especially e-commerce aggregators. Some of them have even filed for bankruptcy. This was after the boom during the COVID when there was a lot of activity, a lot of money being poured into this activity. But I think those brands or those companies like Jack Links who have survived and thriving have done something right.
Yep. Yeah. And I'm still learning exactly what that all is, right? Today is the end of week 4 for me, right? So I haven't even been at the company super long. So I'm still learning a ton. And maybe if you ask me these questions again in 6 months, I have very different answers and maybe better answers. But from what I'm seeing so far, this feels like, some of the things that make the company tick. For me, the biggest thing is like like this has been such a strong culture fit for me that to me, that's like the obvious game changer, right? And the culture is like everybody just drives so hard and is working so hard. And it feels like that spirit of a smaller company in an oddly like multi-billion-dollar company, right? It's very, very interesting. It's a very interesting dynamic.
Got it. And so we come to the end of our very succinct podcast. Thank you again. But before you go, I have a little game that I'd like to play. So it's very simple. It's called rapid fire. So I'll just throw out a word and you just say the first thing that comes to your mind.
Terrifying. Okay.
Right. And obviously, you don't get a lot of time to think. I just want to know how your brain is wired. Very simple, not a lot. So let's go for the first one. The first thing that comes to your mind when I say Jeff Bezos.
The genuine first thing was success.
Okay. Right. Tacos.
Margaritas.
Look at that. I thought you would say total Amazon cost of sales. All right. The next word, ice cream.
Carter and Oak.
Oh, look at that. Now that's how your brain's corrected, right?
Yep.
That is your first company that you founded.
Yeah, that was my company. Yeah.
Any reason why you started ice cream brand?
Yeah. So my mom had battled stage 4 colon cancer for 7 years, from the time that I was in high school, and then she passed away August 1st of 2016. And she would have a sore throat, lack of appetite, and high sensitivity to smells after her treatments. And so she would always eat like ice cream, ice pops, puddings, different things like that to soothe her throat. But it wasn't really nutritionally beneficial. Like she wasn't recovering from her rigorous treatments with those products, but they were really comforting for her. And she didn't want to drink protein shakes or, the powders and whatever else. It wasn't appetizing to her. So I wanted to blend the comfort and indulgence of the ice cream that she was already enjoying with the nutrition that she was missing out on. So then I had developed the Carter Oak, which was a high protein, zero added sugar ice cream, really targeted to healthcare, with natural grocery being a complement.
All right. And the final word, AI.
Oh, I pictured something. A word didn't necessarily come to my mind, but yeah, I don't know, word like robots, but I literally just watched a video on something called, it's like a wearable. It's called like the Pendant or something. And it's like a wearable that then like reflects like, it kind of like reflects like a screen onto like your hand. And then you can do different gestures to manipulate it. And if you hold like a handful of almonds, you can ask it to tell you how much protein is in it or how many calories are in it and whatever else, and it will like assess it and then tell it back to you. So kind of like a different format for what the Ray-Ban Meta glasses are. I literally just watched that like an hour ago, 2 hours ago. So that was the first thing that popped in my head, and I pictured it. I didn't even think of a word, but robots was like the first word that I thought of.
That is interesting. All right. Thank you so much for your time, Kyle. You have been really kind to us, and I think your stories is pretty fascinating. I hope you start your podcast pretty soon. I think a lot of people will want to hear what you and the guests will want to say.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Kyle.